So yes, yes, yes. If the answer that you're looking for to the question of whether or not Sinners is a 10 out of 10, the answer is yes. May even be a 12 out of 10. Okay, let me stop. But I do think that highly of the movie, especially after seeing it twice, seeing it on opening day, and then um, either Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember off the top of my head, but even on a third or fourth time watching it, if at some point when I watch it again, even if I do find something I don't like, I don't I don't see my rating going anywhere lower than a 9 out of 10. I just think the movie's really that good, especially with the emphasis on blues and spirituality behind that genre. Um, I really wasn't expecting the movie to be. Maybe I just didn't look too much into it. I didn't know it was going to be that heavily centered around music and sound specifically, but also specifically pertaining to blues and the spirituality behind it. But it makes sense being that blues is such a spiritual genre in and of itself. Just even going to the meaning of blues. So the folkloric meaning behind blues is that throughout everyday life we sort of experience these troubles, these stressors, these woes, just from being like the human, just living the human experience, right? Whether that be bills, work, if you have a family, taking care of your family, um, or even just family members, like whether you're maybe a caregiver to your mom, or just just things of that nature. And those stressors sort of weigh on our back, and they're represented by these little blue devils, right? These little blue devils come and they hang on your back, and throughout the day, throughout the week, you just accumulate more of those blue devils and more of those blue devils, and they gets to a point where there's so many of them on you, weighing you down, that it slows you down, maybe even paralyzes you. And that's when the big devil comes and gets you. And the big devil is, the one that we're familiar with, Satan, or just a regular, big red devil with maybe a tail and some wings and a little pitchfork and things of that nature, right? And so the idea with blues is that you're supposed to go, probably on the weekend or whenever you can, you go to a club or a juke joint where they're playing blues music, and you're supposed to dance and shake your body. And in turn, you shake these blue devils off you, and that's supposed to make you rejuvenated going into the next week. And that's another week you get to keep the devil away from you. And I think it was so beautifully highlighted in the film, um, where I guess technically the devil is technically coming toward the main character. But I guess you could also make a point about how ultimately the music actually kind of saves him, right? Um, this is not a spoiler. This is not a spoiler free video, by the way. But I guess you can kind of say in the end when he hits Ramek in the head with the guitar, you can make a point that the music did cast away the devil, right? And I love how that's highlighted in the film, about the spirituality with blues. Because, like I said, in and of itself, just through that meaning alone, it is a spiritual medium of music. I also love how they touch on the relation between blues and its connection to trauma, right? And how it's used to sort of counteract that trauma. And as I was just saying, it's used to counteract that stress that blue devils on them, right? And we see that highlighted in many different scenes in the film, but one off the top of my head is with Delta Slim when they're picking them up from the train station and they're driving back to, I believe, Clarksdale, Mississippi is the exact city that they're in. Um, and they basically drive past the chain gang, and he asks Stack to stop the car. They stop the car, he stands up, and he's basically, giving the words of encouragement, like, keep your head up, keep going. Don't let them bring you down, keep your head up. And so then Stack eventually drives off, and little Sammy asks him, like, "Oh, did you know them? Like, why'd you stop to say something to them?" And he said, "No, I knew every single one of them." And he goes into the story about how um, one of his close friends was a musician, and he made a lot of money from one gig, and he was gonna use that money to go, I believe, start a farm or something in Arkansas, or start a farm or do something of that nature. And he was at the train station, and he pulled out all of the money that he got in like a big wad of cash. And so the white people seen that. They made a story about how he assaulted a woman, a white woman, and killed her husband, and then they lynched him right there, right? So, um, and right after he tells the story, he starts humming to sort of self-soothe himself, and then he starts breaking down into like a song. Um, and that dark moment was sort of it wasn't lifted up. Obviously, it's still a dark, heavy moment, but you can see how he's soothing himself with blues, right? And that's really just indicative of what the purpose of blues music was. Um, and I think another point about that too is how Ryan Coogler used sound. He uses sound in music to tell the story a lot in the film, which I'll talk about later. But specifically in this scene, he uses sound and music a little bit to tell us the story, to help us visualize the story. And I thought that was really cool. Like as Delta Slim is talking about the story, he talks about like, yeah, I knew this group of guys. They played music. You can hear the music in the background. Um, he's talking about how he was at the train station with the water cash. You can hear like train noise in the back. You hear like when he starts talking about how the white people started lying on him and eventually lynched him. You hear those sound effects in the back. You hear a man choking in the back, and that's kind of where it stops, right? And the use of sound was really used to visualize what the story was that he was telling us. I thought that was a really cool aspect. But yeah, so like I was saying earlier, blues is inherently spiritual, and it is inherently tied to um, the release and relief of trauma and stress. Um, so the other part about blues that I thought was really cool to see, it's not highlighted explicitly in the film, but it was something that I caught on my first watch. Um, the whole time while watching the movie, I'm thinking of a specific song, and I couldn't think of the name of the person who wrote the song. I couldn't think of the name of the song at the time. Um, But I was sitting here like, I wonder if Ryan Coogler was inspired in any way by this song and this artist, and come to find out through interviews and through my friends telling me about said interviews that it was inspired by Robert Johnson's "Me and the Devil Blues." And so Robert Johnson was a blues singer from the Mississippi Delta who, the way that the story goes, the folklore story, or the real story, depending on what you believe, um, is that he wasn't a good artist at first, so not a good guitarist, not a good singer. Nobody was trying to hear from him. And so at some point he disappears for an extended amount of time. I can't remember how long that time is. I don't know if it's a couple weeks or a couple months, but he leaves town and he eventually comes back, and apparently he's just blowing everybody away with his skill. Like he's the best blues artist that anybody in the town has heard thus far. And the belief, now I don't know if this belief stemmed prior to him making the song or after he made the song, but the belief is that he went to this sort of literal place, but like more so like a metaphysical location, referring to or referred to as the crossroads, right? And so the crossroads is somewhere you can go to communicate with spiritual side of the world. Um, but you can also go to make a deal with the devil, is what people believe. And so people believe that he went to the crossroads and made a deal with the devil in exchange for musical talent. And so he makes a song called Me and the Devil Blues, which is not explicitly saying that he made a deal with the devil for musical talent, as far as I remember. Maybe I'll listen to the song after this, and maybe there'll be another edit in here. But I don't think it's specifically saying like I made a deal with the devil for musical gifts, but he talks about the devil knocking on his door. Um, he talks about walking alongside the devil, temptation from the devil, and eventually succumbing to the devil and making a deal with him. Um, and so I think that was a really cool. It's really cool to see how. Obviously, I don't think the whole movie is based entirely around that, but there is a lot of that aspect in the narrative, and it's cool to see how the creativity of Ryan Coogler to incorporate some of that song into the narrative. Um, I mean, Lil Sammy isn't specifically making a deal with the devil. There's some theories that he are, especially based on that post-credit scene, but I'm not too certain about that. But I do think it's cool because the first lyric in the song, he's like, "Early this morning, I hear it knocking at my door. And then I think it's like, hello, Satan, it's time to go, right? And to me, I feel like the part of the narrative of Sinners um, that kind of encapsulates that is Remick literally coming out of nowhere to find little Sammy and essentially knocking on the door, like the whole entire film. Like, obviously there is the time oldest tale about vampires is that they have to be invited into a dwelling, right? They can't just up and come into a dwelling. Um, Obviously, I don't think all vampire stories follow that, but that's like a common vampire trope. So more or less, he's literally knocking. Satan is literally knocking on the door for little Sammy, right? Um, I thought that was a really cool aspect being brought into the film. It was especially cool for me as somebody who um, I'd like to consider myself somewhat of a historian of African American culture. I love to learn more about history, about my history, about the history of Black Southern culture as well, because Black Southern culture is the backbone of Black culture, of American culture, really, but more specifically, even just Black culture. Um, so it's cool to see someone else who I would like to consider Ryan Coogler a Black historian or a Black anthropologist of some sort, doing his research, doing his due diligence to depict our Black stories and to tell it really well and creatively as well. To sort of piggyback off of, like I said, Remick knocking on the door for little Sammy, I think the scene with little Sammy as well is one of, if not the best scene in the movie, is one of the best scenes in the film. Was when little Sammy uses this ability that they talk about in the beginning of the film as well, that they narrate and they reintroduce that narration during the scene as well, about how across cultures there are across cultures and time there are individuals who are blessed with the ability to use music to tell stories, and that this ability, it can be used to connect with your ancestors, past or present, right? And so obviously we're told very early on that little Sammy is one of these individuals who's blessed with this ability. And so he utilizes this ability unknowingly, um, and which I'm not sure if, I mean, the implication is that there are people who can use it knowingly, but I don't know if that is explicitly said. But in any case, little Sammy is using it unknowingly, where he's singing to the people in the juke joint, and everybody is engaged with him, engaged with the music, all dancing, all partying. But we also see simultaneously that in the room, in the juke joint, there are the spirits being called, the ancestors being called. And some of them are represented by uh, various different African tribes doing their spiritual dances. And um, we're seeing how the narrator talks about how it connects to ancestors in the future as well. So we're seeing somebody kind of dressed up, kind of like George Clinton and Funkadelic in Parliament. Um, we see another person DJing. We see another person b-boying. We see people crip walking. We see there's like one individual from like that 2015-16 era where people were hitting them folks and like the Atlanta sort of dancing. Um, then we're also seeing some Asian representation with the two Asian characters, seeing some like different Asian cultural dances as well. And it was just a really cool moment. And I feel like the broader aspect of that moment is to show how blues is the foundation to all Black music, and then most, if not all, American music as well, but specifically even Black music, from hip hop to R&B to soul to funk to rock and roll, etc., etc. That was a really cool aspect to see, and they're using that in a literal sense. And I guess it can be applied to a literal sense in real life too, but I could also apply it to just, it does connect us to our ancestors, past and present and future, just through the basis of it being the foundation of all African American music. It does connect us to a James Brown, to a Buddy Guy, to um, you know various different influential artists in our time, and to the future, because what's been used today will eventually be used tomorrow, right? So that was a really cool aspect to see. That was more of like a tangible effect of the blues, but it was added onto with the spiritual layer of the connection of ancestry. I just realized a point that I forgot to add onto um, how I felt like it was really the film was really emphasizing the meaning of the blues with the little blue devils and the big devil and things of that nature. Was in the post credit scene, or well, it was still post credit, mid credit scene, I guess is a better term, when Stack and Mary are meeting back up with Lil Sammy as a what, like a probably 80 something year old at this point, 90 something year old. Um, and they're reconvening with them, just catching up with them, and we figure out why Stack lived and why they didn't go after little Sammy and things of that nature. And Lil Sammy tells them that before the sun had went down and all that stuff had went down, like that was the best day of my life. Like, do you guys share that same feeling, or am I alone in that feeling, or what's up? And Stack sort of reassures him that he's not alone in that feeling. That was the last time I got to see my brother, and we had been searching for all these different ways and avenues to be free men as black men in America, and it didn't free us forever, but at least just for those couple of hours when we was in that juke joint, we were free. And that is what the blues is about, or was about in that time period, was to give a release from life for black people. Obviously black people were facing my fault. I don't know what I was about to say, what word I was about to say right there, but black people have been facing horrific things at the hands of other people's expense, in the country. And so in this juke joint, you can come release yourself of that stress of having to worry about discrimination, of having to worry about persecution, um, or having to worry about your everyday life. Just for a couple hours, you could be free. And I felt like that scene really encapsulated that theme and that point of blues music. I think you can also kind of make a parallel with Lil Sammy as well at the end of the film, um, being that when he got back, and it's also kind of one of the saddest points of the film too, is the fact that he returned back to his father's church, and the only thing that his father was worried about, he didn't, his son has a claw mark in his face, he's limping, he's covered in blood, and his father was more concerned about him holding the guitar than actually caring for his child. That was a sort of very sad point in the film. Um, but yeah, you can also make a parallel with Lil Sammy leaving with the guitar as another point to the blues being a medium to release stress and trauma, that he chose to follow his passion for blues, um, which eventually brought him fortune in life, um, and relieved him of the stress of the life that he was living. And not to say, I'm sure he dealt with hardships along the way, but it seems, the implicature is that he lived a long, fruitful life, is from what it seems, right? Opening up his own place, playing at said place. Seems like he has a crowd of people that come to see him, so he's a very notable artist in his time, right? So that's another aspect to that point with the relation of blues and trauma. Um, I did want to talk about as well, another point of the film that I really liked is how Ryan Coogler utilized sound and music to really tell us the narrative. Um, we can start with little. I mean, there's so much of it in the film, but we can start with Little Sammy, right? Even if something is just like when we first hear him sing. I believe when we first hear him sing, it's with Stack. After they split the twins split up. He's with Stack and he's driving, and he's just showing Stack what he has talent wise, right? And sing about traveling, quite literally traveling. Um, then we can fast forward to when he's singing in the juke joint. It's literally a story about how his father does not approve of him being so much in love with the blues, but he's like, I'm sorry, Dad. This is what I love to do. This is what I'm gonna do. And then we hear him sing "Traveling" again in the mid-credit scene, and that one's less like on the nose. But the way I'd like to rationalize that is like traveling just throughout. It's been 60 years since the last time we seen Stack, but just, that one fit more narratively because it's a recalling to when he was singing for Stack originally, and but also they're just traveling throughout these last 60 years, but also the line about what the hell am I doing here, like, and that's just I feel like a testament to him, his life, where his life is currently at. Um, so that was really cool with him. But then when we look at Remick, um, all the songs that Remick and his hive mind, collective of vampires sing, has to do with the narrative, right? So the first time we hear them sing is "Pick Poor Robin Clean," right? Then "Pick Poor Robin Clean" is a song that was actually made by a black woman. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but and actually I think it was made the year prior to when the film takes place. I think it was made in 1931, but it's based off of a nursery rhyme. I think it's called Poor Robin, Poor Cock Robin, and a cock robin is a type of bird, but the nursery rhyme is about this cock robin who dies, and the I believe the farm animals are all mourning its death, and they collect pieces of its body to plan a funeral. I think for the cock robin or something like that, or maybe they just collect pieces of his body. I don't really remember. Um, but so and then the song made by the black woman is based off that nursery rhyme, but more it's more of like a social commentary about how black people have to survive, and one of those mediums of surviving might be picking off of dead bodies, whether that be of black people or white people of other races, but just doing what they have to do to survive. But thematically and narratively, um, with Remick using this story, it's kind of like it's kind of crazy how the layers of that, because it's like he's coming to essentially steal them, right? He's coming to steal these people. The cock robin, the poor cock robin in this place is the people in the juke train, right? He's coming to pick off of them and add to his own collection, so that he can survive. Um, so that's a really cool aspect with that, which and it's also foreshadowing the his purpose, his intent, but then too also later when they're bigger in number, the vampires are bigger in number and they start surrounding the juke joint and they're all singing that song. So that was a cool little foreshadowing with that. Um, Go Lassie Go, or Will Ye Go Lassie, I believe. Um, that is specifically an Irish song, and the meaning behind that song is basically it's about who, a man basically just appreciating life, talking about summer's coming up, and he wants to bring a young lady with him, and he's basically asking like, "Will you join me? Like, will you join me on this journey?" As they're singing that song, it's literally Mary coming out and they're singing that to Mary right before they turn her into a vampire. So like it's just stuff like that. It's just like really cool to see like the layers and the depth that Ryan Coogler introduced into this film with things like that. And then the last song is Rocky Road to Dublin, right? And so the Rocky Road to Dublin is a song. I think it was actually a poem first, but it's based on a man who is leaving one city. Starts with a G. Can't think of it. Can't think of the name of the city, but he's leaving one city in Ireland to eventually traverse to Liverpool, England. And so he's basically it's kind of like a coming of age story a little bit, and a story of persecution and discrimination to some degree as well. Um, where it's a man, an Irish man, talking about he's leaving his home, kissed his mom, hugged his dad, said goodbye to his various women that he had that were sad to see him leave. Um, he leaves. He goes to he's leaving to go to England. Um, he stops in Dublin. He gets robbed, I think, if I'm not correct. He gets robbed, and then also made fun of for his accent. And then when he gets to Liverpool, he's also getting made fun of for his accent. People are trying to fight him, all that stuff. So that's indicative of Remick and his own backstory. Presumably, I believe he kind of talks about how his I don't know if he talks about it, but there might be like a line or two where he refers to the subjugation of Ireland by the English, and um, so we kind of get this idea that he's been around for at least maybe 1,000 years, maybe 900 something years, something of that nature. So I think this is sort of like a literal retelling of him leaving where he was born in Ireland and venturing to the United States and having a maybe even being persecuted. We saw how the Choctaw were hunting them down, um, and maybe even trying to relate to the black people in a way of how a story of somebody being made fun of for their ethnicity, for how they talk, for how they look, how they walk, things of that nature. I think that's a layered thing as well. So now I'm going to kind of diverge into just things I generally liked about the film, which I've been talking about things I liked about the film in the first place, but this is more not really necessarily related to the whole aspect of spirituality and the blues. But to kind of piggyback off of my last point, I really like how the villain is an Irishman. I think it was super creative to go the route of another oppressed people being the villain versus doing the easy thing and making him like a blatant racist. I think I'm not gonna speak for all of us, but I think I can say I have a very relatable standpoint with when I first seen the trailers for this movie and heard about this movie and what it was going to be about. I was kind of thinking the idea behind it was that we were dealing with like racist white vampires, right? And I think it's some of them obviously, were, well, I don't know if they're still racist, but they're at least returned into vampires. It was kind of like this hive mind mentality that they shared with Remick. So, but I think it was more creative and to challenge yourself to make a villain like that because one, there's so many parallels between black people and Irish people at the time, right? Obviously, we know that Irish people were indentured servants during the time when black people were, enslaved, and then even probably a little bit afterwards with the sharecropping and like Jim Crow era. Um, but so to have it be a man specifically from Ireland who experienced that subjugation by the English, experienced his culture being ripped away from him, his native tongue being ripped away from him, religion being stripped from him as well. Um, so he's not really, I don't think he's racist at all, but in turn, and he's actually trying to basically say, I relate to you guys. I relate to black people and other people of color who've been oppressed by white people. But in his attempt to come off as an ally, he's also still oppressing people, which I think that's such a great layer to that as well. The oppressed become the oppressor. And I think that was a really creative avenue to go with him. I think another creative aspect that was used in the film is the use of the vampiric lore about how vampires can't sort of barge into places; they have to be invited in by the owner of the dwelling. I think that was really cool, especially when the layer of metaphor was added in regard to black people and how oftentimes within our culture, within our spaces, that we invite people who are not of the culture into our spaces, and then eventually, not all the time obviously, but eventually sometimes they end up becoming problematic or oppressing people in some type of way. So I think that was a really cool layer to add with that as well. So just overall really creative storytelling and writing in regards to creating such a complex villain, which we know he has the capability to do that. Ryan Coogler, just based off of previous films like Black Panther with Killmonger, Black Panther 2, or Wakanda Forever rather, with Namor, even the Creed series to some extent, even though I know some of the characters are sort of based off previous iterations in the Rockies movies, but still great writing, as we expect from Ryan Coogler. Another aspect of the film I really like the dichotomy of like joy and sadness, right? In the mid-credit scene, Lil Sammy acknowledges that he wakes up almost once a week, every day since that day. So for like the last 60 years, he relives that night every day. But he also acknowledges that night was like the best day of his life. That, as well as on a more like somber note, like the Smokestack twins will more than likely never ever see each other again, which is super like, it was one of those things that really makes it Shakespearean. Is like these brothers who would never separate from each other in any circumstance in their everyday life, they're now separated because Smoke went to go join the ancestors. And from what we know from the exposition given by Annie, once you become turned into a vampire, once you come back as a vampire and then are killed, you can no longer rejoin the ancestors. Now, we don't know if that's confirmed per se, but that's, I'm just going off of the exposition given. So essentially, he'll never be able to see his brother again, even in the afterlife. So that's like crazy to think about. But the flip to that, like the joy aspect of that, is that now Smoke gets to be with Annie and his daughter, and then Stack gets to be with Mary, and Mary gets to be with Stack, which is something that they wanted to do, but obviously due to discrimination, possible persecution, they just couldn't have that happen in their everyday life as humans. But now, as vampires, they can live on forever. I thought was really cool. I thought that was really cool. It's just those things that make you go like, damn, like that's super sad, but there's a little bit of hope at the end. This was kind of crazy about it, about the storytelling in this film, is I feel like they're ultimately kind of sad endings, but kind of happy in a way. Kind of leaves you a little hopeful. But that's another part of the film I do like as well. I like all the unanswered questions that we have. I feel like the story is told in a way that it's kind of told like somebody would be verbally telling you a story, right? Like you don't necessarily connect every single loose end when somebody's telling you a story, whether it be like your homeboy or like, you know, cousin, brother. But like we'll never know we'll never know what exactly the Smokestack twins were up to in Chicago. We'll never know what happened to Cornbread's wife and I'm assuming he had kids, I think, right? We'll never know what happens to little Lisa now that she's an orphan. She lost both her parents. The Choctaw people that arrive in the film earlier, but then we just don't see any of them again. Assuming, like, where did they even come from? Because I believe the Trail of Tears, I don't know if it started in Mississippi. I'm pretty sure it went through Mississippi, but at the time, I think they weren't in Mississippi, so they must have been chasing Remick from, like, states away. Remick is a big question mark. Where did we come from? We know he came from Ireland. The implicature is that he was there in Ireland during the subjugation of the country by England. So he'd probably be somewhere around, any historians in the comments can help me, but I would imagine somewhere around like 900, 1,000 years. I think I might have stated that earlier in the video. How did he get to the States? How long was he in the States? That's a question mark as well. Does little Sammy ever get in contact with his family after he flees from them and goes to have a successful career in Chicago? Perlene's husband, for all he knows, his wife went out to go see her family or something some night, and now she's not coming back home. So what happened with him? And even just like the random people in the juke joint, I'm sure they had families or loved ones, significant others, things of that nature that they had to return home to. We don't know what's going to happen with them. And then on top of all of that, all of those people who are missing their family members, Lil Lisa, Cornbread's wife and family, all the people in the juke joint, they will never know what happened that night. And that is, I feel like, super like Shakespearean tragedy. Like I think that's really cool. And you know, personally, I don't want, I love this universe and the story that he wrote, but I feel like the movie is so much better just leaving those questions unanswered. It makes it sadder, it makes it more impactful, makes it more, you know, gut-wrenching and tear-jerking to some extent. Another aspect of the film that I really liked is I love that Smoke has Annie as a love interest. I think it's very imperative, especially since media in regards to black people hasn't always been great. Well, media as well, but specifically cinema hasn't been exactly the kindest to black people throughout history. And because cinema is only really about like 100 years old, or maybe like 100 and something years old. So that isn't a lot of time. I mean, if you think about what 100 years ago was today, it'd be 1925. That's prior to when the movie takes place. And black people were still under Jim Crow laws, under subjugation, under scrutiny and discrimination. So it's imperative that we, as black creators, change the narrative to show that there is beauty in blackness, and to show, you know, little black boys and girls, and as well as just black people in general, regardless of age, that black is beautiful. So it's good to see Annie as a dark-skinned, full-figured woman, a very beautiful woman, by the way, was played by Wumi Masaku, and she killed her role. She killed her role. I mean, everybody on screen killed her role, but generally speaking, when we see full-figured black women, full-figured dark-skinned black women in media and in movies like this based in this time period, they're usually like the mammy archetype, or in this case, she's a hoodoo priestess or shamans, and usually they're depicted as sort of like these asexual mother-coded beings, so we don't really attribute romantic relationships to them or sexual relationships to them. So it's good to see that in the movie, especially because we're not used to that. I've been seeing sort of like a collective of people on Twitter, TikTok say like when they first seen her, everybody was sort of confused on like, is that his mom? Is that his cousin? Is it his sister? And myself, I kind of had the same type of feelings at first, though the second watch through, it was very clear that they were flirting with each other, that they had some type of romantic chemistry. I mean, even the fact that Smoke pulls up to the little shack to put flowers next to the baby grave is kind of like, it's very much indicated that they're a thing. But I think there's a lot of us, especially as black people, are sort of internalized to view women who look like her in cinema as not a love interest. We don't view them as a love interest. So it was good to see that subversion of our expectations, which I think was very intentional on Ryan Coogler's part, being someone that's so technically sound in terms of his cinematic presence, and he's such a methodical researcher and pays attention to detail very much. I would imagine that he kind of took that into account and probably did that on purpose to subvert our expectations and to change the narrative. I definitely give kudos to him, and I really appreciate him, that we should be appreciating our full-figured queens, our dark-skinned queens, and as well as our full-figured dark-skinned queens, to see them and give them the respect as someone who can be a love interest in the film the same way Zendaya can be a love interest in the film, or Zoe Kravitz or Tessa Thompson can be the love interest of a film, The other part and the last part that I really liked about the film is I liked how it was, elements of it were a social commentary about real life, race, black people, community, but I love that it wasn't sort of the whole entire point of the film, and it wasn't gimmicky as well. And I don't want my message misconstrued, because I definitely love film and any type of media that talks about race, that talks about our stories, black stories. But I love when it's done tastefully. And I feel like this movie does it very, very, very tastefully. In the same way that I think Get Out does it very tastefully as well. Clearly a movie about race, but at the end of the day, it's also just a horror film. Like I can also just see this as a narrative as well as a social commentary, right? But there's some media like Them, for example, is a show. I don't know if plenty of people remember it, but it's a show, and it was based on a black family that moves to Compton, which, if people don't know, at the time, Compton, California was all white. So they were the only black family in their neighborhood, and they experienced racism and things of that nature. But there's also like a horror, spiritual element to it. But and each family member has like a different sort of horrific entity. It's like spiritual entity that haunts them throughout the series. And the dad, he has like this dude called the Tap Dancing Man, who is basically, he's based on like a minstrel caricature of black people. And the Tap Dancing Man sort of just antagonizes him throughout the entirety of the series. But it's very unserious. It's very, I feel like, distasteful in some ways. I feel like it kind of lessens the impact and the seriousness of minstrel shows. Same thing with Lovecraft Country, who Wumi Masaku is in, funny enough. But there is this little girl, I can't think of her name, but she's haunted by these minstrel characters that come to life out of a book. a name called like Tipsy and Topsy, something like that. And they're like these little minstrel monsters with sharp teeth and little red painted on smiles, like how minstrel shows look, that go up to like their ear. They're very demonic looking, and they sort of haunt this little girl all throughout, like I think maybe 2 or 3 episodes. But they're also very serious. They're like dancing and crumping and shit while they're chasing her, and it's just like it was just gimmicky. It was gimmicky, and wasn't a big fan of it. I'm gonna put a link in the description of a video essay that does a really good job talking about the problem with black horror and describing why those 2 instances that I named in Them and Lovecraft Country and why they were problematic. I'm gonna try to find it and put it in the description. But yeah, that's something that I feel like Sinners does not do. I feel like it's very true and authentic to black people, black culture, blues, and how blues was such a great avenue for black people, and how blues is still impacting black people today, just through other means and other music. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Sinners. It's a great film of the year so far, by far. And I don't try to give this title too often to movies especially, but definitely an instant classic. I really want to go see it a third time in IMAX 70 because I know that's how the movie was intended to be seen per Ryan Coogler's words. So I definitely want to see it a third time in IMAX 70 before it leaves theaters. Before I go, I do have a question though, because it kind of ties into the aspect of the film I was referring to in terms of the dichotomy of joy and sadness and Remick. So like I was mentioning earlier, the exposition given by Annie in the film is that once somebody becomes a vampire and they can no longer join their ancestors. So that really made me kind of think, what if hypothetically Remick did succeed in turning little Sammy? Would he have even been able to use that ability anymore? Because assuming that he can't rejoin the ancestors, I would also theorize that he wouldn't be able to communicate with them as well. Because clearly that's what Remick is there for, right? He's there to get little Sammy because he knows he has that ability to connect with ancestors past and present, and Remick wants to connect back with his ancestors, right? But if once you become a vampire, you can no longer have access to your ancestors, or you can no longer rejoin them in the afterlife, why would you be able to connect with them still? That's how I'm feeling about it. If you guys agree or differ in opinion, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it. But yeah, that has been the end of me yapping about Sinners for almost 43 minutes. Whether you guys think I'm far behind or way ahead of the curve, I'm miles away. Thank you.